Hi, my name's Dan. So this video is an introduction to my channel and actually the main series of reviews that's on my channel. It's taken me about 8 months to get around to doing this, but actually I've only really just thought that this would be a good video to have. So this video is not a review of an album. This is an explanation of what's going on my channel and the history of why I'm doing this and the process that I use for doing my video reviews. Sorry, my album reviews in videos. So the history quickly then. So a few years ago, I got fed up of listening to the radio whilst I was commuting to work, driving there and back. I get about half an hour in each direction. And I was listening to British Radio 2, and, you know, about 30% of the songs were things that I would enjoy, and more and more it seemed that it was kind of embracing modern pop, which I was feeling quite cold about. So I decided to change my listening habits. I decided that using the time whilst I was commuting to listen to something that I actually enjoyed would be a good idea. So I started listening to albums, and then after a while, for some reason, and I can't remember my motivation at that point, I decided I was going to listen to a list of the best prog rock albums of all time, and start writing reviews. So I created a list, so I amalgamated it from various sources, various kind of best of things. I created this amalgamated weighted list, and there were about 300 odd on the list in total. I did a few reviews as well that were not on the list, just ones that I thought should be included. And I was posting these on Facebook. And then when I got to the end of this, so that took me, I can't remember what, a year or so to do that, I decided I was going to turn this into a book. So not a book that's been published, but I turned it into a kind of glossy PDF thing, spent quite a bit of time on it, and really enjoyed that process. But my question then was, what am I going to do next in terms of reviews? So I decided to go mainstream, and this idea of having a list of the greatest was something that really appealed to me. So I created a list of the 1,000 greatest albums of all time, which I amalgamated from the 500 greatest albums of all time from NME, which is a British music magazine, 500 greatest albums of all time from Rolling Stone, and then also had a ranker list of the greatest albums of all time, and I amalgamated this and created this list of 1,000 greatest albums, and I started reviewing, and this time, instead of just posting them on Facebook for my friends, I started a blog, and this meant I got very few reads, to be honest. Every time I did a review, I would post a link to it on Facebook, and I had about 4 or 5 regular readers, I reckon. And there were two things that kind of that triggered a change from that. So the first one was that I was never really that happy with the list. What I really wanted was something like Metacritic, which takes a lot of different reviews and amalgamates them and gives an overall ranked review. And but the problem with Metacritic for albums is that it only covers albums as far back as when Metacritic was started. I can't remember when that was, but it's not that long ago. And a lot of great albums obviously are older than that. And so I didn't want to be tied down. And then I discovered this site that I'm working from, which is called Acclaimed Music. So this is run by a guy who's a statistician who has done exactly what I was wanting someone to do, which is to take a load of critic reviews, and mostly he's taken it, I believe, from end of year lists and from greatest of all time lists, from not just one market, so from around the world in various places, and has amalgamated them into this amalgamated list. And so there exists on this site a list of the 3,000 greatest albums of all time, by using these critic lists. And so I looked at it, and I was starting to get tempted, but I was a bit daunted by the fact that there were 3,000. 1,000 I thought I could tackle, but 3,000, this is a lot. This is going to take me years, maybe even 10 years in total. And the rate I was going, it might have been longer than that. But the more I looked at the list, the more I got sucked into this idea, because there was a lot of stuff that I didn't know, but I liked the look of or the thought of in the bottom, from 3,000 up to 1,000. So I took a plunge. And the other thing that I did at that point was I jumped out of the blog and started doing it as video reviews, which is obviously what you can see on my channel. Now, I've been doing YouTube videos on other subjects, on different channels, connected with my work. And so I've had about 2 years under my belt doing video stuff and editing them together. And you might say the editing's not great. I'm definitely an amateur. So I launched into it, and that was about 8 months ago that I started that, and we're about 350 down out of 3,000, so it's a bit over 10%, in fact 11%. So for me, the reason why I'm doing this is it's a challenge. It's a hobby that I've definitely developed, and it's about learning stuff. It's about understanding the history of music, what's been regarded as good, about discovering good stuff that I don't know, which was really the first motivator for me to start doing this sort of thing. I recognise that it is a big challenge and that I may never finish this list, but I'm 10% through, and I'm still enjoying it. It doesn't necessarily mean I enjoy every album that I'm listening to, but that's part of the point. It's a voyage of discovery. So my aim in terms of reviews, in terms of who they're for, well, number one, they're for me. It's for my own pleasure that I'm doing this. But number two is I'm trying to speak to a general listening audience. And what I mean by that is I'm not assuming anybody is a specialist listener in any sense. Now, I'm guessing most people are in some ways specialist listeners. But what I can't do is assume that that's going to be the case. So when I'm doing jazz albums, well, jazz, I'm definitely out of my depth, but I'm not speaking to people for whom jazz is their main focus of listening. I want to speak to people who might dip into jazz like I would, and give this kind of idea. Is it a good album to listen to? Is it the sort of thing that you might enjoy? So I try to keep references to other stuff very mainstream. I try and avoid too much elitism. I try and avoid kind of talking about, well, this is better than the previous album or worse than, because I want to take it out of context, generally, because that's how people listen to albums, unless they start to get into something, and then they might have the appreciation of the context and of the history. I'm really not that interested in. I might get interested in talk about the artistic influence and how important an album is, but it's more about what it is about as a listening experience is what I want to talk about. Sometimes I can't help talk about the context, because some albums really have a very strong context, and that's really important. And generally what I try and do in a review is I try and hit three things. So I want to do some background. So I want to do, a little bit of education about the album and the act, and so a little bit of placing it in some context. I want to do some description. So I want you to understand what the album's like. I do have two clips of music, one at the start, one at the end. I have so far managed to always have that. I do have ongoing battles with copyright because of this, but this use of music in reviews like this is covered by a thing which is in US law is called fair use, and British law is called fair dealing, and I am pretty, after this amount of time, I am now pretty convinced that I am absolutely right in saying that this use is protected by law. And I've had quite a lot of encounters with the copyright system here. I'm not going to go into that. Excuse me. And then the kind of final thing that I want to do is that I want to keep these reviews short. They're meant to be accessible. They're meant to be easy to get into. And so my aim is that they're somewhere less than 10 minutes. And my ideal length is around 5. Some of them come in shorter than that. Most of them are somewhere around 5 to 7 minutes long. Depends on how much that I feel I've got to say about it. And I've become somewhat amazed that seems to be an audience. It's not a huge audience so far, but at this point when I'm recording this, I've got nearly 300 subscribers on the channel. Some of my videos have had, so the kind of average number of views for a video is somewhere around 50 to 80 or something like that. But they kind of build up over time. The biggest one I've had was over 1,000, and that's because I got a mention in a newspaper from the artist who had seen my review, so that was huge and it was brilliant. Right, moving on to the process that I use. I kind of feel like I'm going to want to try and justify this, and I do a bit feel like it's a reasonable process, but it is just the process that I landed on as I started doing those reviews. So I tend to listen twice to an album. There are some exceptions. So one exception is albums that I actually know really well. I might only listen to once. Albums that I've already reviewed for my blog or for my prog rock albums, I might only listen to once. Sometimes I'll listen to them twice. And albums that are huge compilations, so like 4 CD box set of something, the chances are I'm only going to listen to that once. Occasionally there's an album which is just a normal length album, not come across it before, but actually it's really quick and accessible and easy to pick up what I think about it. And again, I might only listen once in some of those with some of those settings. Mostly, though, I'll listen twice. Sometimes it ends up being more than that. There's often kind of bits and pieces because I'm doing it as I do other things, and so I might end up starting 3 times, but getting to the end twice. And what I tend to do, particularly for albums that I don't know, is to have the first listen to have as little context as possible, so not looking up any information about the act or about the album itself. And so I am listening as much in isolation as I can. And for a lot of the stuff that I've got at the moment, fairly low down the list, actually that is quite effective. There's stuff where I have no idea what it's going to be like before I start playing it, and I sometimes get some interesting surprises. And that's fine. Then I try and educate myself a bit about the album, about the act. This is usually just looking them up on Wikipedia, and I do put links to the Wikipedia pages that I've used in the details. And sometimes that's interesting, sometimes that's not so interesting, but I'll see what I find out. And then with a bit of context, I'll then do a second listen. The other thing that I try and do is that I often will listen with 2 different sets of technology, partly because I think that's important to get different kind of impressions of the album, and particularly the sonic quality of it depends quite a lot on what technology you use to listen to it. So the primary thing that I started with was the car, of course. I talked way back at the beginning of this video about listening on my commute, and I still do that. I listen on my laptop, I listen on headphones, so that's usually through my laptop or through my phone. I listen on earbuds that I've got. I listen on my phone just kind of natively through the speaker, which is the tiniest thing that I've got. And I listen through a Bluetooth speaker, which I've got fairly recently. So none of these are very high tech, but they are similar to the way that a lot of people listen to music these days. So I feel like that's justifiable, that I don't have a very high-end system that I use to listen to these albums. I'm sure I would get more out of the albums if I did, but I feel like it might be a bit disingenuous to do that. The other thing, of course, is that the whole point was to listen to stuff in the car. Now, my system in the car is pretty good, I think, so I get quite a good depth to it, and I tend to crank it up when I'm on my own in the car. The other thing is that I often listen whilst I'm doing other things, so I tend to avoid listening to music that has lyrics in it whilst I'm doing anything else that has words, because I won't take the lyrics in at all. But I will do things like playing Minecraft. I do that quite a lot, or other games. And sometimes I'll listen in a more focused way. Usually my second listen is the more focused of the two listens. Obviously, sometimes I'm listening when I'm driving. Again, I think this is justifiable because this is how a lot of people listen to music. They don't sit and put an album on and just focus on that 100%. And I don't have the capability in myself to do that in a disciplined way for every album that I'm reviewing, especially because I'm trying to crank these things out quite quickly. I try and do one a day, and I'm often doing 2 a day, so we'll see how we go. I find that when I know an album well, sometimes that's more of a challenge to review because I'm trying to disconnect myself from my history with the album and think about how would I respond to this if I was listening to it for the first time. Sometimes that's really quite difficult. I try to be fair as much as I can. Obviously, it's about my opinion, but I recognise that this list that I'm going through means that every album on this list must have some merit somewhere that somebody has thought was good about it. Sometimes there are some genres of music that I find that more challenging than others. I quite relish that challenge. I'm quite enjoying the process of exposing myself to, particularly rap and hip-hop is the area that I'm probably most challenged with, but jazz as well. And if you've watched several of my reviews, you might realise that I've got a thing about country music as well, so I struggle with that somewhat. So yeah, that's probably about it. One thing I would recommend anybody who wants to do it is to, because I've collected them all together in a playlist. The playlist is linked in the details below. If you click on the playlist and then you just play, so I've got a clip from each album at the start during the introduction, and I found it a lot of fun just to kind of flick through and play a little bit of that one, then a bit of the next one, without necessarily listening to my reviews. Obviously, I did them, so I'm not that keen on listening to myself. But it's quite an interesting experience, mind you. At 350, I found that this takes a couple of hours now. By the time we get towards the end, this is going to have a major undertaking. But I'm kind of feeling like what I really want to do when I get to the end, if I ever get that far, is to have a session, it may be over several days, where I flick through the whole of the list to get this general impression overall of the music. Anyway, I hope that's been of some interest to you, and that's it from me for now.